Welcome everyone. I am in northern Indiana and I'm actually at a cemetery paying my respects to quite an interesting fellow. His name is George Molchan and you may be more familiar with him as Little Oscar. Or maybe not. But let's find out a little more about him. Who was George Molchan? Well, George was born in Gary, Indiana in 1922, and George was short. As a grown man, he reached a height of about 4.5 feet by most accounts. This bothered George as he was growing up, and a theater owner who he knew put him in touch with a man named Meinhardt Raabe. Now, you may not know the name Meinhardt Raabe, but I guarantee you've seen him. Meinhardt was also short, and he played the coroner in The Wizard of Oz. Remember him? As coroner I must aver, I thoroughly examined her. Yeah, that guy. And he met with George. Now, Meinhardt lived in Wisconsin. George lived in Indiana, so they were a few hours apart, so it was kind of convenient. Now, as it turns out, Meinhardt Raabe also worked as a spokesperson for Oscar Mayer, the Wiener Company. In 1936, he started working as a character called Little Oscar. Little Oscar was a cook, a chef, who drove around in the Wienermobile making public appearances. In fact, he took that job in 1936 and he had to request time off in order to work on the movie The Wizard of Oz. So he met with George and he told George, things will be fine, go to school, get an education, you will have a happy life, and sure enough, that's what happened. George went to school. He got degrees in accounting and communications, and he went to work for Pepsi. Then in 1951, Meinhardt Raabe got in touch with George and he said, George, Oscar Mayer is expanding the Little Oscar program. And they were putting Wienermobiles in Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia. And he thought that George would be a good person for the character, and he said he should come in for an interview. So George did. So he went to Madison, Wisconsin, and he walked in the room and he said, I thought I was the only good-looking little guy out there. He was surprised to see 4 other actors lined up applying for the job. Well, of course, it's no surprise that George got the job. He said they were looking for someone who knew how to meet people, who could speak, who was educated, so he was a lot more than just a short person. Not only did he get the job, he kept it for 36 years. That's right, he played Little Oscar for 36 years from 1951 till 1987. Imagine that. There were other Little Oscars between 7 and 9 from what I could uncover, but he said he was the only one that was hired and retired as Little Oscar. So he played Little Oscar from 51 until the mid-70s when they retired the traveling character of Little Oscar in the Wienermobile. He used to go around and do store openings and go to malls and all kinds of different things, and he would give out these little Wiener whistles. I remember when I was a kid I had one. I don't remember ever meeting Little Oscar, but I do remember seeing the Wienermobile, and I do remember getting a Little Oscar Mayer Wiener whistle. So what happened in the 70s? Well, even though they retired the program, they did not retire George. He continued to work as Little Oscar, but now at the Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. I thought I knew a lot about Walt Disney World, but I didn't realize that they had an Oscar Mayer store and that Little Oscar worked there and made regular appearances. Eventually, George reached mandatory retirement age, and he had to retire as Little Oscar. He said he would have loved to continue working as that character, but he moved down to Florida. And to say retirement is a little misleading because he did continue to work as a spokesman. He worked for a car dealer, and he said he used to pick up different odd jobs as elves and leprechauns and different things of that sort. So although he was no longer Little Oscar, he was still a spokesperson and he was still working in character, in roles that a smaller person would fit. Unfortunately, both Meinhardt Raabe and George Molchan are both gone, but it's nice to know that we remember them And there is a little bit of little Oscar left behind. And there it is. Isn't that an interesting grave? Beloved son and brother, George A. Molchan, born June 5th, 1922, died April 12th, 2005. You can see in the middle, he was little Oscar. There's a picture of George on the right as himself, and on the left as little Oscar. There's little Oscar, George. There's George the man. And there, I assume, is George on the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. But the legacy of George and little Oscar lived on even after his passing. At his funeral, Oscar Mayer sent a Wienermobile, and his mourners all got Oscar Mayer Wiener whistles. And at his gravesite, they sang, "I wish I were an Oscar Mayer Wiener," and they all blew their Wiener whistle. Oh, I wish I were an Oscar Mayer Wiener. That is what I truly like to be. 'Cause if I were an Oscar Mayer Wiener, everyone would be in love with me. It seems pretty apparent that little Oscar and George meant a lot to the Oscar Mayer Company in that they went out of their way to honor him in such a special way by sending that Wienermobile down and by allowing that to permanently mark his resting site. George Molchan obviously lived to make people happy, and I'm glad we had this opportunity to visit his resting site and remember him. From Merrillville, Indiana, I'm Mark from the Average Me channel. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment down below. Please share and like the videos, and if you haven't already, please subscribe.
Oh, I'd love to be an Oscar Mayer Wiener. That is what I truly like to be. 'Cause if I were